In 1177, just 500 Christian knights faced Saladin's massive army of 26,000. Everyone expected them to be wiped out. But what happened that day became one of the most unbelievable victories in history. The desert wind carried the scent of dust and fate. Under the relentless sun of the Holy Land, banners bearing the Golden Cross of Jerusalem fluttered weakly, not in triumph, but in defiance. In the year 1177, the Kingdom of Jerusalem stood on the brink of ruin. Its young king, Baldwin IV, known to his people as the Leper King, was only 16 years old, pale, frail, and racked by a disease that slowly devoured his flesh. Yet behind his wasted body burned the heart of a lion. Far to the south, a storm was gathering. Sultan Salah ad-Din Saladin, the unifier of Islam, had assembled a massive army. 26,000 men marched beneath his green banners. Mamluk cavalry, Sudanese infantry, and Turkish archers. Their goal was clear: to crush Jerusalem once and for all, to end the Crusader kingdom forever. News of the invasion spread like wildfire. In the halls of Jerusalem, panic and doubt whispered among the lords. Many urged retreat. "We cannot face him," one knight declared. "He outnumbers us 50 to 1, another murmured. "Better to shut the gates and pray for mercy." But Baldwin IV, thin and trembling, rose from his throne. His voice, weak yet steady, silenced them all. "If God wills it," he said, "then I will ride. I will meet Saladin on the field, for Jerusalem does not surrender while I draw breath." It was madness, yet it sparked something in the hearts of his men. The Templars, sworn knights of Christ, rallied to him. The Hospitallers followed. From castles and villages came barely 500 knights and a few thousand foot soldiers, all that remained to stand between Saladin and the Holy City. As they rode out of Ascalon, the desert stretched endless before them, waves of gold and fire. Baldwin rode at the front, his face covered by a silver mask to hide his affliction, his hand trembling on the reins. Beside him, the Templar Grand Master Odo de St. Ammon spoke quietly, "Sire, we ride to our deaths." Baldwin's eyes, blue and fierce, met his. "Then let us ride as if we were already immortal." Ahead lay Montgisard and destiny. From the plains of Egypt, the banners of Saladin stretched like an emerald sea. 26,000 men marched northward, their armor glinting beneath the sun, their war drums echoing across the dunes. Saladin rode at their head, mounted upon a black Arabian stallion, his presence commanding even among kings. Around him fluttered the standards of Damascus, Aleppo, and Cairo, united at last under his rule. His officers rode close, their faces proud, certain of victory. A young emir laughed as he gazed toward the northern horizon. "The Franks will flee before we even unsheathe our blades," he boasted. Saladin smiled faintly beneath his turban. "Perhaps," he said, "but even lions fight when cornered. We will burn their kingdom to ashes so they never rise again." The army moved swiftly, crossing the Sinai, sweeping through Gaza and Ramlah. Fortresses that had once defied sieges fell without a fight. The Crusader garrisons fled before Saladin's tide. The Sultan's confidence grew. Jerusalem lay open before him. But in his haste, he left behind the great siege engines, his baggage train, and much of his supply. He was chasing a ghost, an easy victory that seemed inevitable. The desert, however, does not forgive arrogance. Scouts reported that King Baldwin's forces had retreated toward Jerusalem. Saladin ordered a march toward the holy city itself, his men singing of glory and paradise. Yet, as the long column wound its way through the wastelands near Montgisard, the air grew heavy, unnaturally still. The sound of drums faded, replaced by the whisper of wind through stone. On a distant ridge, a glint of sunlight flashed. One of the Mamluks frowned, shielding his eyes. "What is that?" Before he could speak again, a voice cried from the hills, the deep, thunderous cry of horns, and from the ridges erupted the thunder of hooves. 500 armored knights, their lances leveled, descended like an avalanche from heaven itself. At their front rode Baldwin IV, his silver mask gleaming, his banner bearing the golden cross. The impossible had come to meet him. The desert exploded with motion. Sand flew, horses screamed, and sunlight flashed upon steel as 500 knights hurtled down the slopes toward an army 50 times their size. At the head rode Baldwin IV, the Leper King, his pale face hidden behind the silver mask, his thin hands gripping the reins as though life itself depended on this single charge. Behind him thundered the Templars, the Hospitallers, and the last knights of Jerusalem, their white mantles stained with dust and sweat. "Deus vult!" they cried. "God wills it," their voices rising above the roar of hooves. In the Muslim ranks, disbelief turned to panic. The front lines of Saladin's army, unprepared and scattered, froze for a fatal heartbeat before chaos erupted. Some thought demons had descended upon them. Others believed the Franks had been multiplied by divine power. Saladin himself turned sharply in his saddle. "Close the ranks. Hold your ground," he shouted, but his words were lost beneath the storm of battle. The first impact hit like thunder. Lances splintered. Horses crashed into men. The front line of the Saracen army folded under the weight of the charge. Dust turned red as steel met flesh. Baldwin rode like a man possessed. His illness had left him frail, but adrenaline burned away the weakness. He fought not as a dying king, but as a living legend, striking down one foe after another with his sword. Around him, his knights cut through the enemy lines, unstoppable in their fury. Odo de Saint-Amand, the Templar Grand Master, rode beside him, his voice booming, "Strike deep, break their heart." The Muslim cavalry tried to rally, circling the flanks, but the knights wheeled and charged again, their formation tight, precise, merciless. Dust rose in choking clouds, and the screams of men and beasts filled the desert air. Saladin's personal guards surrounded their sultan, trying to shield him from the onslaught. "My lord, we must withdraw," one shouted. But Saladin's eyes burned with fury. "No," he growled, "I will not flee before a handful of dying Franks." Yet even he could see it. His army, spread out and disordered, was collapsing under the impossible courage of a doomed king. The sands of Montgisard had become a storm of steel, and the unthinkable was only beginning. The battlefield dissolved into madness. The disciplined formations of Saladin's mighty army splintered as waves of panic rippled through the ranks. Arrows flew wildly, striking friend and foe alike. Camels broke loose, trampling men in blind terror. Trumpets blared meaningless orders, while banners disappeared into clouds of choking dust. From the center of it all, Baldwin pressed the attack. His silver mask was streaked with blood, his horse lathered in sweat. He seemed less a man than a figure of myth, death riding in the shape of a king. Wherever he turned, his knights followed, cutting a path through 10 times their number. Odo de Saint-Amand roared commands over the din. "Close ranks. Strike from the flanks. Don't let them breathe." The Templars obeyed, smashing into the sides of the Muslim lines again and again, their heavy horses scattering light cavalry like dry leaves. Saladin's lieutenants tried desperately to regroup their men. Emir al-Adil, the Sultan's brother, shouted until his throat bled, "Hold! The Sultan commands you to stand." But the momentum was gone. What had begun as a confident march to victory was now a nightmare, a sandstorm of confusion and fear. Baldwin's small force pressed deeper, their armor dented, their weapons slick with blood. Each knight fought surrounded, outnumbered, yet their charge never faltered. They had no thought of retreat, only of making every heartbeat count. Somewhere in the chaos, Saladin's golden standard swayed. Seeing it falter, the Crusaders roared and surged forward. Saladin's guards tightened around him, arrows hissing past as they dragged him away from the killing ground. "My lord, you must live to fight again," cried Al-Adil, seizing the Sultan's reins. Saladin's eyes blazed. "By God, I will return," he spat, before turning his horse and galloping toward the south. The sight of their commander's retreat shattered what little resolve remained. The great host of Islam broke and fled, pursued by the relentless knights of Jerusalem. By sunset, the sands around Montgisard were strewn with the bodies of 20,000 men. The survivors, including Saladin himself, rode through the night without rest, harried by their own fear, and Baldwin, trembling and blood-stained, knelt beside his exhausted horse, whispering through cracked lips, "Not by my hand, Lord, but by yours." The desert wind carried away his words, a prayer, a confession, and the sound of history turning. As night fell, the battlefield went silent except for the moaning of the dying and the restless snort of horses. The moon rose over a plain littered with the remnants of war, broken spears, fallen banners, and countless corpses. The sand that morning had gleamed gold. Now it was black with blood. Baldwin dismounted slowly, his legs trembling with pain. He had been fighting for hours, the disease gnawing at his strength, yet he still stood. His knights gathered around him, what few remained. Out of 500 who had ridden into battle, barely half were still alive, their armor scarred, their faces ghostly with exhaustion. But they had done the impossible. They had crushed Saladin's army. 26,000 men scattered, slain, or fleeing into the desert. Giovanni of Ibelin, Baldwin's cousin, approached, his voice hoarse. "Sire, we have won. Against all reason, all odds, we have won." The young king looked toward the horizon, where faint fires still burned, remnants of Saladin's retreat. He tried to speak, but emotion seized his throat. Finally, he whispered, "Then it was not our strength. It was the hand of God." He removed his silver mask. The men saw the ravaged face of their Leper King, eyes sunken, skin pale and cracked. Yet there was something radiant in his expression, a peace that none had ever seen before. Odo d'Est. Amund knelt before him, planting his sword in the bloodied sand. "Jerusalem lives because you did not yield. You are more than a king, my lord. You are God's weapon." Baldwin shook his head weakly. "No, brother. I am only his servant." In the distance, faint cries still echoed. Saladin's soldiers lost and dying in the desert, hunted by thirst and despair. The once invincible sultan had barely escaped with his life, his pride shattered. The Crusader camp lit torches, and priests moved among the wounded, offering blessings and comfort. The surviving knights prayed in silence, too tired even to remove their armor. When dawn came, the first light revealed what few battles ever showed: a miracle made flesh. A boy king, dying of disease, had faced an empire and triumphed. And for one brief moment, the kingdom of Jerusalem stood not as a remnant, but as a beacon burning bright against the endless sand. Morning broke over Montgisard like a ghost. Smoke rose in thin columns from burned tents and shattered wagons. The air was thick with the scent of death and iron. Crows circled lazily overhead, their cries echoing over the silence that follows slaughter. Baldwin IV stood upon a small hill overlooking the plain. His knights had gathered the enemy's banners, once proud, now torn and trampled, and planted them in the sand before him. The green of Islam fluttered among the crosses of Jerusalem, an image so strange and solemn that even the victors bowed their heads. Giovanni of Ibelin approached, his armor dented, his face blackened with soot. "Sire, Saladin has vanished into the south. His men are scattered. Some throw down their arms and beg for water." Baldwin's gaze was distant, fixed on the horizon. "Let them live," he said quietly. "Enough have died in this desert." The knights exchanged uneasy looks. Mercy was rare in holy wars, but none dared question the king. As they spoke, messengers returned from the field. "My lord, Saladin's baggage train is captured. Gold, silk, and armor enough for an army lie abandoned." But Baldwin barely heard them. The boy who had led an army of 500 against an empire looked older than his years. His illness had worsened. His hands trembled, and blood flecked his lips when he coughed. Yet his eyes, clear, bright, unbroken, burned with a strange serenity. Odo de Saint Amund dismounted and knelt before him. "God has made you his champion, sire," No man will doubt his favor now. Baldwin smiled faintly. A champion? He murmured. No, my friend. I am but his witness. He struck them down. I merely stood to see it. That night, the Crusaders camped beside a small stream. The wounded groaned, priests sang hymns, and the wind carried the faint scent of myrrh and smoke. In the stillness, some swore they saw a glow upon the horizon. Not fire, but something pure, almost holy. Far to the south, Saladin rode in silence with what remained of his guard. His head was lowered, his eyes shadowed. One of his emirs spoke softly. "My lord, how could this happen? 500 against 26,000? Saladin did not answer for a long time. Finally, he said, "The hand of their God is heavy, but the desert remembers all. One day I shall return, and the Lion of Jerusalem will not rise again." The sands whispered around them, carrying his vow into the endless night. The road to Jerusalem wound through fields of dust and olive groves turned to gold beneath the setting sun. Along it rode the remnants of the army, the battered but unbeaten warriors of Montgisard. Word of their victory had spread faster than wind. Villagers poured from their homes to watch them pass, shouting prayers and throwing flowers before their horses. For years, the people of the Holy City had lived in fear of Saladin's armies, fear of annihilation. Now, for the first time, they lifted their faces to the light. The impossible had happened. The Leper King had returned as the savior of Christendom. As Baldwin approached the city gates, bells began to ring from every tower. The sound rolled over the walls like waves upon the sea. Monks and nuns filled the streets, bearing candles and icons. Children ran barefoot through the crowds, shouting, "Long live Baldwin! Long live the king!" The young monarch rode slowly, almost shyly, his silver mask reflecting the light of the torches. His armor was dented, his cloak torn, but to the people he appeared as a vision, a knight anointed by heaven itself. At the gates of the Holy Sepulchre, the Patriarch of Jerusalem waited with his priests. He knelt as Baldwin dismounted, tears glimmering in his eyes. "My son," the Patriarch said, "the Lord has delivered his city through your hands." Baldwin shook his head, his voice thin but resolute. "Not through my hands, Father, through his mercy. Let us give thanks." Inside the church, the knights laid down their swords before the altar. The sound of steel against stone echoed like thunder, a vow renewed. The choir's chant rose, mingling with the weeping of soldiers who had seen too much death and too much grace to speak. Odo de Saint-Amand stood near the doorway, watching his king kneel before the relic of the true cross. "He should have died out there," he whispered to Giovanni of Ibelin. Giovanni nodded. "Perhaps he did," he murmured. "And what rides now is something greater." Outside, the bells continued to ring. The people sang. For one brief, blinding moment, the kingdom of Jerusalem seemed eternal, radiant beneath the stars. And in the palace that night, Baldwin sat alone by a window overlooking the city he had saved. His body trembled with pain, but a faint smile touched his lips. He whispered, "So long as I breathe, no man shall take you." The words drifted into the dark, a promise to his God, his people, and his dying kingdom. Winter came early that year. The winds from the Judean hills swept cold through the towers of Jerusalem, and the king who had once burned like fire now grew weaker with each sunrise. Baldwin IV's leprosy advanced. His fingers stiffened, his skin cracked and bled, and his strength faded like a candle in the wind. Yet the memory of Montgisard burned on. Pilgrims came from across Christendom to see the young monarch who had defied Saladin. Chroniclers wrote of him as the new David, the boy king who slew the giant. But within the palace, the hero lay sleepless, haunted not by victory, but by what it had cost. Giovanni of Ibelin entered quietly one evening, finding Baldwin at prayer before a crucifix. The king's armor stood beside him, the same battered mail he had worn at Montgisard. "Your body needs rest, my lord," Giovanni said gently. Baldwin smiled faintly, the mask of silver lying beside him on the table. My body has never obeyed me, he whispered, but my heart still listens. He lifted his gaze to the crucifix. Christ bore his cross until the end. I must bear mine. Giovanni bowed his head. You carried more than any man could. Baldwin turned to him, his eyes clear despite the fever burning behind them. Montgisard was no triumph of arms. It was a warning. God lent us his hand for a moment, to show us what faith can do. But he will not fight our battles forever. The next time Saladin comes, he may test our hearts instead. Outside, the bells of the sepulchre told the hour. The city slept, unaware that its greatest king was already fading into legend. From the southern deserts, traders brought whispers. Saladin was rebuilding, gathering new armies. His pride was wounded, but not broken. The crescent would rise again. Baldwin knew it. He felt it in the tremor of the wind, in the silence of his dreams. He looked to the distant hills, where the moon hung low above Jerusalem's walls. Let him come, he murmured. When he does, may he find men still brave enough to die as we did. The candle flickered, and the boy who had humbled an empire bowed his head in prayer. Outside, the city of God slept beneath a fragile peace. Years passed and the desert healed, but men remembered. To the south, in Cairo, Saladin rebuilt his strength. He forged alliances, trained new legions, and swore that the humiliation of Montgisard would be avenged. Yet in his heart burned not only anger, but respect, for the young king who had defied him with nothing but faith and courage. More than once, when his generals mocked the Franks as weak and dying, Saladin silenced them. You speak of disease, he said coldly, but that boy shamed me before God and men. Pray that when your time comes, you face death as he did, without fear. He would not move against Jerusalem again until the time was perfect. In the north, Baldwin IV ruled from his throne, his body nearly ruined but his will unbroken. He could no longer ride a horse, nor even hold a sword, yet from his chair of state he directed the affairs of the kingdom with fierce clarity. The nobles who once doubted him now obeyed in silence. Giovanni of Ibelin and Odo de Saint-Amand carried out his orders, strengthening the fortresses along the borders. Still, the king knew the truth. The peace he had won was fragile, a line drawn in sand before the tide. One night, a messenger arrived from the desert, a half-dead scout from the southern frontier. The Sultan moves again, he gasped. He gathers the tribes. The banners of Damascus and Cairo march together. The court fell silent. Baldwin dismissed his council, save for his closest companions. He will come for us, the king said softly, but he will not find us sleeping. He looked to a nearby tapestry depicting the Battle of Montgisard, knights charging through clouds of dust, a silver-masked figure at their head. His hand trembled as he touched the fabric. Once, he whispered, God gave me the strength of 10,000 men. I will not ask for that again, only that he grants me the courage to face what must come. Far away, beneath a crescent moon, Saladin's banners rippled over the dunes. Two kings, one broken, one unbowed, watched the same stars and prepared for the reckoning to come. Between them lay the silence of the Holy Land, waiting for the roar of destiny. The year was 1185. The kingdom of Jerusalem stood in uneasy peace, its borders ringed by fortresses and its throne draped in silence. King Baldwin IV, the Leper King, was dying. The disease that had devoured his flesh now reached his heart. In the royal palace, sunlight fell through colored glass upon his bed. The once bright eyes now dim, the once steadfast hands little more than bone. Giovanni of Ibelin sat beside him, silent. The priests had come and gone. The sacraments had been given. But Baldwin was not afraid. He stared toward the window, where beyond the city walls rose the Mount of Olives, bathed in gold by the setting sun. Giovanni, he whispered, do you hear it? Hear what, my lord? The wind. The same wind that blew across Montgisard. A faint smile touched his lips. It still carries the sound of hooves. Giovanni bowed his head. The knights remember, sire. All of Christendom remembers. Baldwin's breath came slow and shallow. "Tell them this," he murmured. "It was not our swords that won the day, but our faith. I was no hero, only a witness. Let them believe even when they are few, even when they are dying, for God is strongest in the weak." Outside, the bells of the Holy Sepulchre began to toll. The sound drifted through the window, mingling with the whisper of the desert wind. Baldwin closed his eyes. "The Lord is my strength," he said softly, "and my shield." When the bells ceased, the boy king who had defied an empire was gone. The city mourned for 40 days. From the poorest pilgrim to the proudest noble, they lined the streets as his coffin passed. Not as a leper, not as a ruler, but as the Lion of Jerusalem. Far away in Damascus, when news reached him, Saladin stood in silence. His courtiers waited for triumphal words, but the Sultan simply bowed his head. "May God have mercy on him," he said. "He was a king." And so, two great enemies were bound by the same desert wind, one by death, the other by memory. Years later, when Saladin finally took Jerusalem, the chroniclers said that no blood was spilled, that mercy ruled the city that day. Perhaps, they whispered, the spirit of the Leper King still walked its walls, watching over both conqueror and conquered. For courage does not die with kingdoms, and faith, once lit, burns forever.